Andrew Hawnt. Henrik stared at the sky shared by the nearby Slesvig and wondered if it was still there. 1914 would never end for him, and neither would the war that was building across the globe. The world around him was lost in fog as thick as the black smoke he had choked on and spat out when he'd been running, when he'd been one of many, before he was alone. Henrik stared at the eddying fog that had eaten the sky above him and waited for death. The blood had clotted messily around the wound in his shoulder and the second in his side. It smelled metallic in the cold morning air. He listened to his laboured breathing and thought of the damage the bullets must have done. He thought of Mother. He thought of the 16th birthday he would never see. One thing he was grateful for was the fog. It hid the dead. It hid boys just like him, but those boys hadn't been toppled by a couple of stray shots. Their heads had been sheared in half by heavy rounds. Their innards lay in heaps beside them after the impact of other shells. His uniform itched. It always had. He thought of home and hot food and what a stupid idea it had been to lie about his age and come out here. No Man's Land certainly lived up to its name. None of the others that had fallen beside him had been men. Not yet. They never would be now. It would only be a matter of time before he would join them. Not long to go until his final breath would be lost in that fog and darkness would fall across his mind as his heart stopped and his brain shut down. Henrik thought of the stories that came with death. He thought of the folk tales, the ghost stories, the Valravn, which ate the bodies of the dead. He took in a sharp breath, triggering agony in his chest as the creature stared down over him. Valravn! It stood as a man. Its long, thin body and limbs were clad in a black mockery of an old military uniform. Its face was hidden by a mask, bone white, depicting the hooked beak of a bird's skull. Behind the mask, a plume of ragged black feathers dipped to and fro as if sailing upon the fog. Did I call you? Henrik asked, coughing and spitting blood as he did. Did my thoughts of you bring you to me? It stared down at him, the eye sockets of the mask shrouding its face in darkness. Slowly it shook its head. Will you eat me when I die? Henrik asked, his voice wavering. Valravn leaned closer to the wounds on Henrik's cold body. The beak of the mask was almost against the thick clots that matted itchy fabric to ragged skin. Then it stood back and moved away, quickly obscured by the fog. Henrik forced his head to move to follow the creature and saw the shape of it crouching nearby. Another boy like him must lay there, Henrik thought. Dark things unfurled from the mass where the creature's head would have been had it been human. The mask hung at its side as lengths of something sinewy emerged and attached themselves to the blur of a corpse. The fog wavered and thrashed for a moment, and the shape of the body was gone. The blackness seeped back upwards and was again hidden by the bird mask. Valravn walked deeper into the fog and was gone. Darkness fell over Henrik, but it wasn't permanent. His eyes opened, maybe the next day, maybe just a few hours later, and he found he was able to move a little. The shock must have been worse than the wounds themselves. With some effort, he pulled himself upright, found an empty rifle to use as a walking stick, and started to inch his way through the fog that still hung over the horror of the field around him. He stumbled and fell, pain screaming in his shoulder and stomach, and he scrabbled back, expecting to see the ruined remains of another boy soldier. Nothing much. A helmet, a few shards of wood. Valravn must have consumed them all. In his dizzy, hungry, thirsty delirium, the presence of a supernatural being from the distant folklore of his ancestors seemed acceptable, if not normal. He wandered amidst fog as far as he could, then fell. His stomach ached from hunger, and a fever was building. He feared infected wounds. Henrik fought to stay awake as he collapsed in mud at the edge of a modest forest. Thin trees buried their heights in the fog like veins against skin. Amid those trees Henrik saw the shape again. Valravn fed upon the dead that were hidden in fog. Again the creature came to him, and again it passed him by. Henrik dragged himself after it, calling out incoherently. It stopped and turned, almost lost in the grey swirl. It raised a thin finger and pointed to Henrik's left. The boy followed the gesture and saw a knapsack that was hidden by a broken tree stump. Henrik shuffled over to it and grabbed it from the ground. Inside was a canteen of water, a hip flask of brandy, stale bread rolls, hard cheese wrapped in cloth, nuts. Henrik wept, but Valravn was gone and could not be thanked. The boy ate and drank. It felt like the greatest meal in history. Some strength returned. He took up his journey through the endless fog once again. No, it can't be this way. The thought hammered at him as he heard the foreign words, heard the readying of foreign guns. His heart sank as he realized he had journeyed across no man's land and straight into enemy territory. A soldier in strange fatigue stepped closer, emerging from the fog, and aimed a worn rifle at Henrik's face. He spat words that Henrik didn't recognize, but the fear in the other boy's eyes and the tremble of his hands as they held that gun said it all. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here, but I have to. Henrik wept against his makeshift walking stick. He wanted to raise his hands in surrender, but couldn't force himself to do so. This was wrong. This whole war was wrong. He had wanted to fight and be the man his father had said he would never be. He wanted to go home a hero. But none of that mattered anymore. He was a child facing another child with a gun, and both of them were terrified. With an anguished sob, the foreign boy squeezed the trigger. The report of the weapon sounded like God slamming the doors of heaven shut. But no pain came, no blood. The fog had stopped. Before Henrik stood Valravn once again. It was holding the moment back. Henrik could feel it. It pointed at him. A choice, came a voice like twigs and mould. Valravn clutched its mask and pulled it away. Beneath it lay a perfect copy, gleaming and new. It offered the bone mask in its hands to Henrik. Not life, it said to him, but not death. Why? Henrik asked. Why do this for me? The thing regarded him. Let the journey never end, rather than the life be taken. Feed on what remains, and wander forever. Henrik thought of the death that awaited him behind the dark figure, of the broken bodies that littered the path he had walked, of the blood he had lost and the lives that had been taken, of the conflicts that lay ahead if he survived. He reached out gingerly, and all was cold. The shot rang out around the scared soldier, but it hit nothing but fog. As the sound faded, the distant unfurling of feathers could be heard like a whisper between words.